I'm Garrett McQueen.
And I'm Scott Blankenship.
This is TRILLOQUY, true and real stories from the fringes of classical music. Scott, another great day hanging out with you over the weekend. Some nice steaks on the grill. And
It's
all
that
sort
time of
thing.
year. You got to maximize the grill time.
Yeah, and then for me, working overnight, being outdoors during the light hours, getting to feel the sun on your skin just feels extra special, especially in the summer when you get to be carefree and yeah.
I will say one thing. I'm angry at this state because we get 40 below wind chills in the winter,
Mm-hmm.
and then, over 100 with the heat index in the summer. I feel like we should get a break in the summer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I grew up in the South, so I don't mind feeling a little warm. And, here in Minnesota, we get to have all of the seasons, like in a very real way. So I appreciate the summer because I know what's coming.
That's, especially working overnight.
But I remember one day coming home from the store or something and going down my street and seeing how beautiful all the leaves were, the bright yellows and oranges. And, in the spring, you talked about how your dog Radar, he really feels spring in a real tactile way.
Yeah.
Feeling the ice melting on the lake, but then also feeling, the bit of snow that's left behind, but also the sun is out. Yeah. So shout out to Minnesota winter and summer and spring and fall, the 4 seasons of Minnesota.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shout out.
Yeah. um, well, I'll tell you who. Well, this is a weird transition, but I was going to say who doesn't get a shout out, but I guess we're talking about him. So while at your house, we had a little moment of putting all of this cancel culture into play. So as is normal at your place, music videos are just kind of rolling on the screen, and an R. Kelly video rolls up.
Mm-hmm.
And I immediately, I don't know, I won't speak for you. When you happen to hear an R. Kelly video or something come across, are you instantly thinking about what everyone is thinking about these days? Or
Of course.
Yeah. So I was like, well, we got to turn this off. And no one would be there if we didn't turn it off, or if we continue to listen. It's not like there's outside judgment there, but it's gotten to a point to where it's just a part of my core values to not engage that, because I can't listen to any of those lyrics without applying them to teenagers or even younger.
What era would you say was his heyday? What the big one was Ignition, right? Isn't that the title of?
Or the remix to Ignition was the big one. I remember in my high school dances, Step in the Name of Love
Right.
being big. But, all the way back to me being in, I think it was 2nd or 3rd grade is when Space Jam was out. I Believe I Can Fly and all that stuff. So he's had more than a decade of a heyday, maybe even 2 whole decades.
Okay, so in that time frame when he was popular, I was paying zero attention to that.
So you
I was-
you weren't plugged into R. Kelly anyway.
No R&B, no pop R&B, nothing like that.
So for him to be canceled, there was no cognitive dissonance for you. It's not
No.
like you had to go throw away your CDs. Is there an artist you've had to throw away?
Yeah.
Who?
Okay, so this is just something that has just happened like in the last 6 months. But do you recognize the name Ryan Adams?
No, unfortunately. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
No, it's okay. Ryan Adams is sort of an alternative rock icon. He's an incredible guitarist. He's done some covers that I really appreciate, but his originals just really put a bookmark in that era that he was popular. Like in the late 90s, early 2000s is when I caught on to him.
Sure.
So he was married to Mandy Moore for a while.
Okay. Oh, I know Mandy Moore. Oh, and I'm looking at his photos now. Yeah, I don't even recognize him by face.
He evidently suppressed her career, right? So that's one thing. He was like doing what Amy Beach's husband did to her,
Right, right.
saying you can write your little ditties here at home, but you're not going to go out on tour as long as we're married.
And that's what he was doing to Mandy Moore.
Right. So her career stalled, or I don't know if she's trying to get back to touring or recording, but then in March it came out that he was sharing explicit photos with a girl of like 14.
Oh my gosh.
See, and and right there I'm like, I'm out. I can't even acknowledge him as an influence, as a
And did you feel a sort of kind of way for having to cancel him? Were you like, oh, but because that's how a lot of people feel about R. Kelly. They're like, oh, but his music is so good and blah blah blah. And
it wasn't hard.
it
I
wasn't
mean,
hard for you,
no,
yeah.
he also has a reputation of being a jerk, really difficult to deal with. And I've seen him in concert before, and it was fine. I don't remember any highlights. It's not like every single one of his shows was some groundbreaking, musical event.
Well, for what it's worth, I don't know if Mandy Moore has really taken off, but she did sing all of the songs in Tangled.
Yeah.
Which did you see that movie?
No, but I knew that she was involved with it.
Because we were talking earlier about how you've never seen Lion King. What WTF, man? But you're gonna see the new one.
All right, I'll do the
You're gonna see
research.
Lion King featuring Beyonce.
But you see the thing. But you see the thing is that I'm from the Disney generation of the Jungle Book, and I don't even want to start down that road right now with the Jungle Book.
One day we need to talk about that. And we do need to get into the interview that we're going to today. But I'll just say, in grad school, I took a class called African American Music.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a broad sort of title, but what the class was starting from the slave songs and the Negro spirituals all the way up into modern day rap and hip hop and all that sort of thing, and all of the different appropriations along the way.
Yeah.
We spent my teacher was white, but she loved to drag Elvis Presley, and I and I was right there with her. But we actually spent a day talking about Disney, and we watched the "I Want to Be Like You" clip.
Yep.
And man, that song slapped, and it's really great to sing, but it's with adult eyes and more
Yeah, I know
historical eyes, it's
I
just so
know.
obviously messed
I
up.
just
It's
cringe.
effed up, man.
But okay, so does the fact that it's Louis Prima, does that play into it as well? Are you familiar with Louis Prima?
Yeah, I mean that plays into it. Them using the coconuts to make those monkey snouts that mirror blackface,
Yeah.
and or just the whole concept. I want to be like you. I want to be like the great white man. Anyway, we'll talk about that on another opus of Triloquy. But today, I brought up the whole cancel culture thing because that's not really something we apply to these composers of the past. And a lot of classical music, like organizations, a lot of classical music writers, other podcasts. I want to shout out Katie and Delaney because
Classically Black.
yeah, Classically Black. A couple weeks back, they dragged Strauss real bad, and yeah, people just want to protect the legacy of these men so much, despite some of their atrocities. And the question always is, well, you have to separate the art from the artist. But as we've already established, we're not doing that with R. Kelly. You're not doing that with Adams. What was his name?
Ryan Adams.
Ryan Adams.
No, I don't have any trouble cutting him loose, but
we have trouble cutting some of these composers loose for some reason, right?
yeah, I know. And I've got an episode of Hop Notes coming up that is putting a focus on Munich because of Oktoberfest. And do I use Strauss or not?
Yeah.
If I bring it up, do we talk about the problems or do we just focus on the beer?
Right. And my point always is, even if the composer is questionable, there were other people around. It's not like Strauss was the only person in Munich writing classical music. Just so many of these other composers and these other figures are kind of washed away,
Yeah.
in the books of history for other reasons, for very specific reasons, that I think we've addressed. And one of those figures I wanted to bring up today as a way to get us into today's interview was a guy named George Bridgetower. So do you know who he is?
Yeah.
What do you know about George Bridgetower?
Well, he was right along the lines of no, that was Chevalier de Saint-Georges.
Yeah, another black violinist from days past. He led the first all-black regiment in the French Revolution. He was a champion fencer, and he was also real cold on the violin.
Yeah.
and also wrote music.
And I heard that Mozart was really jealous of him early on because he had everything that Mozart wanted. He had like this royal appointment and was getting all this attention. And Mozart's like, well, I want to be like Chevalier.
God forbid we say Mozart was jealous of somebody.
I think it's possible.
Yeah, of course it's possible. But we just anyway.
Yeah.
So that's Joseph Bologna Chevalier de Saint Georges, but George Bridgetower, was one of Beethoven's homies, and the piece of music known today as the Kreutzer Sonata
Yeah.
was originally written for him. How about we hear just the opening few bars of that sonata? Isaac Stern and Eugene Eastomin in that recording there. These days, that piece of music is remembered as the Kreutzer Sonata, but it was originally the Bridgetower Sonata. George Bridgetower, this black violinist, living in Europe during the late 1700s, early 1800s. Beethoven writes this piece of music, and by the way, I've always dreamed to tell this story on Drunk History. We got to make that happen one day. So Beethoven writes this piece of music for George Bridgetower. George Bridgetower sight reads the premiere. It's dope. Everyone loves it. They go out to have dinner and drinks or something afterwards. And maybe we should reenact this sometime, or maybe for the Drunk History. So they get there, and at one point in the night, George Bridgetower sees this woman and says the historical accounts say that he said something disparaging about this woman. Maybe he called her a I don't know what words I'm allowed to say, but he called her and someone who and whatever. Um,
Oh.
and that pissed Beethoven off.
Yeah.
And he was good about stripping the dedication. We all know the story of Beethoven 3,
Right.
stripping the Napoleon dedication. So he stripped the George Bridgetower dedication from that piece of music and rededicated it to a guy named Rudolf Kreutzer,
Yeah.
who many believe never even played the piece, but it's now called the Kreutzer Sonata. And George Bridgetower is just one of the many musicians of color that existed during this quote unquote heyday of classical music, who we don't talk about all the time, who slipped through the cracks of music history. And Lee Koonce, who is featured on this opus of TRILLOQUY, one of his big driving things is how black musicians have always been involved with classical music as long as there's been something called classical music. And the organization he runs, the Gateways Music Festival, is a great conduit in reminding audiences of that, remind audiences of the history and the equal ownership people of the African diaspora have over this instrumental music. How we have ownership of it presently and in the future.
So you came in contact with him through Gateways, correct?
Right. And I can't remember who passed my name along. This would have been about 5 years ago, the first time I played with the Gateways Festival. But someone passed my name along. It takes place in Rochester, New York, at the Eastman School of Music every other year. Because of financial things, and me and Lee go into that conversation as well. And again, he doesn't he doesn't describe it as a diversity initiative. He calls it a celebration of the achievements of people from the African diaspora in classical music. Period. And that's all it is. So again, it's a lot like the Sphinx Conference is one of these big family reunions where we all get to come together, and all the who's of black classical music come out. One of my favorite memories is playing a Rachmaninoff concerto with Stuart Goodyear at the front.
Oh, nice.
Anthony McGill, principal clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic, has done concertos with the Gateways Festival. I've met a lot of incredible composers. Shout out to Adolphus Hailstork, who I met at the last Gateways Festival, among many other really great composers, musicians, professionals, and yeah, none of it would be possible without Lee Koonce. So I chat with him today about the Gateways Festival and the history of blackness in classical music, and what all that means. Really great guy to talk to, and a really great conversation that I think you'll enjoy. Lee Koonce, thank you so much for sitting with me today.
Thank you, Garrett. It's my pleasure.
So, the late great Nina Simone referred to the work she did and the music she engaged in as black classical music. And there's been so many, other discussions about that phrase classical music and what it means and what it should mean. But in your work and in your studies, you've proven that even the most traditional usage of the phrase classical music has included black people since the beginning.
Absolutely. I think that many folks believe that our presence in the world of classical music is new or something that is recent. But as you know, people of African descent have been involved in this music since there was ever a thing called classical music. Starting back to the time of Henry VIII and in the courts of Henry VII and Henry VIII. So there have been people of African descent involved in this type of music.
Why is that history sort of scant or still obscure these days?
Well, I think there are several reasons. One is certainly that what most of us are taught in conservatory and music schools, it misses all that information. It's not included in the curriculum, so a lot of folks just don't know about it. And I think the other reason is that as popular music has become much more popular in the black community, and music, gospel, and rap, and soul, and R&B. I think we've forgotten in our communities that there was once a very strong tradition of classical music, even in modern times within our own community. So I think it's a combination of us not learning this information in the conservatory, those of us who are musicians, and in the community, many of us have forgotten that this music was prominent within our communities.
Yeah, it's funny that you speak about that not so distant tradition of classical music in black communities. My mom tells a story about when she was in kindergarten or first grade. Back in those days, in the lunchroom, you said grace as a grade or whatever. And accompanying that grace every morning, I wish I could remember the woman's name she said, but she said this old black woman who would sit at the piano and accompany the grace, and then when you talk about the piano being a piece of furniture in so many people's homes, and now that's just not the case. Wow, that makes me think about a lot instantly. What's your What? Tell me a little about your musical upbringing. I don't know where you went to school or where you studied or anything.
Before I can go there, I mean, that story about the kindergarten teacher and your mom, I think that is so poignant because there was a time when the public schools provided, especially in larger cities, provided really high quality music instruction in instruments, not just singing, but in instruments. And so then that led to certainly this knowledge of the language of instrumental music, classical music or otherwise, in our communities in a way that doesn't exist now, because a lot of our kids are not getting that in public schools. But I grew up in Chicago, and I grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood called South Shore, and then Hyde Park. The National Association of Negro Musicians, which was at that time predominantly a classical music organization, was founded, I think, in 1919. They're celebrating their 100th anniversary this year. And it was a group of mostly classically trained black musicians, African-American musicians, who were excluded from the stages in Chicago and around the country. And so they created their own. They had their own concert series, their own chamber music groups, their own orchestras and everything. So I grew up in Chicago, which was like very many large cities in this country. There was a strong black classical music tradition in those communities. And so our black churches, especially the big mainline churches, Protestant churches, had pipe organs, and they had people who could play those pipe organs, and they had chamber music groups, and they had people who could play in those chamber music groups who looked like the congregants. So the world I grew up in was a world that was a lot more, there were many more people at that time, and this was in the 60s and 70s, people of African descent playing this thing we now call classical music. And that tradition is slowly disappearing within our communities. So,
oh yeah, go ahead.
So I grew up in Chicago. I went to the Oberlin Conservatory of Music in Ohio for an undergraduate degree in piano performance. I'm a pianist. And then went to the Eastman School of Music for a master's degree in also piano performance.
You know, when you talk about Oberlin and Eastman, I think about sort of the way I came up through my, my hometown's university, the University of Memphis, went on to USC. And, when I look back and the more people I talk to, it seems like I wish I had had that HBCU experience. Was that something you ever thought about?
It is. I mean, my parents were graduates of HBCUs, Central State and Wilberforce, and I really struggled with this notion of going to an HBCU and getting kind of the reinforcement that we kind of miss when we're in other kinds of institutions. But I don't regret going to Oberlin. I don't regret going to Eastman. There were fine educations there as well.
When you went to Oberlin, moving from Chicago, did you take that? I'm wondering about the blackness that you took with you, because you had a strong foundation and the history of black classical music in Chicago. Did you ever find yourself challenged at Oberlin or at Eastman or anywhere else that you've worked concerning bringing your blackness with you and really engaging classical music as something we have equal ownership of?
Mm-hmm. I don't think I was that astute and aware when I was 17 or 18 years old.
Woke, quote unquote.
Yeah, I wasn't woke. I just knew that the world I lived in as a black classical musician looked different than the world that I had just gone to at Oberlin. But, the fact is, for many of us in our training, even at early ages, we're in environments that we are usually the only ones.
Yeah.
I remember playing for All City Chorus and being the accompanist for the All City Chorus, and they were like, out of 300 people, 4 or 5 black kids in that choir. And so even growing up, the training part of my life was really in an environment that was not very inclusive of people of African descent. So when I went to Oberlin, I guess I just wasn't really aware that, so where are the black people in this survey course of music history? Mm-hmm. This year-long survey course. Why aren't there any black people in this book? I think there's they always include Duke Ellington, and they would always include William Grant Still.
Right.
And you would think, well, my gosh, that's it. A jazz guy, and this other classical guy who's long gone. And so the depth of knowledge about our involvement in this music, I don't think I grew to that place until many years later.
And then you mentioned Duke Ellington, and I didn't learn this until I got into radio. He has a lot of I hate to say non-jazz, but orchestral compositions that work just fine on the concert stage, just as fine as our friend George Gershwin. And we just don't engage even that. We don't even go in depth when it comes to the most famous names when we talk about black instrumental music. I'm wondering if you had like a peak moment or peak moments when you decided, okay, it's time for me to really engage this thing called classical music in a much more equitable way, in a way that shows much more energy toward black history in classical music.
And let me just say about Duke Ellington. I mean, he is among that incredible group of musical geniuses who frequently gets relegated to this kind of what some people believe is the subcategory of jazz.
Right.
The thing is, he is, regardless of the genre, he was an extraordinary musician and a musical genius. I think that in some time ago, Gershwin was also put in that category. Well,
sure.
He's kind of a jazzy guy. He was a musical genius. I mean, I played when I was a kid the Rhapsody in Blue, and I actually picked it up a couple of weeks ago and started working on it again because I found the score at a yard sale here in New York.
Oh, okay.
So I thought, well, let me try to play it. And so, I've forgotten all of it, but I'm playing it and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is an extraordinary piece. So I think that Ellington and Gershwin get pushed over into this category because they're using this vernacular that is this American jazz vernacular as not good as what is known to have come from Western Europe. And that to me is just offensive.
Yeah.
And so I think that the world is changing a bit and beginning to recognize the genius of Ellington, the genius of Gershwin, and that makes me really, really happy. And I think that some of my knowledge of this actually came about through my association with Arminta Hummings Dumasani, the founder of Gateways, and the Gateways Music Festival. I joined the board of Gateways in 1997, and it opened my eyes in a way that they hadn't been opened before. And so I started to really explore our relationship to this thing we call classical music, people of African descent, and that began my journey. So I would say it started relatively late, in 1997.
And we're definitely going to talk about the Gateways Music Festival, but you're talking about Gershwin has just made me think. So maybe a month ago, 2-3 months ago, I hosted a panel for the Minnesota Orchestra on the topic of Gershwin as a cultural appropriator. Is he or isn't he? I'm curious. Do you have any opinions there?
Yeah, but aren't we all cultural appropriators?
Sure.
And I think that it is the world that we live in. I think that I think that his genius he borrowed from his environment at the time that he lived, and the places in which he lived, and I think all great artists do that very same thing.
So the Gateways Music Festival, I first attended a couple festivals back, and I'll tell you, when I left the airport, got to the hotel, basically in my mind I was like, all right, well, here we go, another week of playing, another week of gigs, but very quickly I saw that it was something completely different, just something that I had never experienced before. For people who don't know what the Gateways Music Festival is, would you mind giving them a little bit of history about it?
Sure, happy to. The mission of Gateways is to connect and support professional classical musicians of African descent and enlighten and inspire communities through the power of performance. So Gateways is celebrating its 26th anniversary this year. It was founded by the extraordinary pianist Arminta Adams at that time, Hummings, and founded in Winston-Salem, North Carolina in 1993 and moved to Rochester, New York in 1995 when she assumed a faculty position at the Eastman School of Music. And it's been based in Rochester since 1995. And the festival is, technically it is a 6-day classical music festival with 125 musicians and about 50 performances over those 6 days that celebrate musicians and the music of people of African descent. So for 6 days there is this extraordinary series of concerts, of panels, and you're moderating a panel this year, film series and solo recitals and chamber music recitals. But more than that, it is, I think, how Michael Morgan describes it. Michael, our music director and conductor, Michael says that Gateways is the biggest family reunion he's ever been to.
Yes.
Where everybody is related, not by blood, but by music. And their love of the music, this thing we call classical music. And I think that is really the power of Gateways. It is this extraordinary family reunion, and it's the community of the musicians, and it's the community of folks who live in Rochester. It's all one big family reunion, and it is the spirit is palpable when all of those folks come together. It is quite extraordinary.
It is, and I remember Maestro Morgan saying at one of the first rehearsals I attended, he said something along the lines of, this festival is just like all the other ones, except we're all actually having fun here. and that's definitely the case.
Yes.
And you described the Gateways Festival as not a diversity initiative. Why do you use that language?
Yeah, and I think that there's this assumption sometimes that anything that people of African descent or Latino descent or anyone who's non-white, anything we do is somehow in service of promoting diversity or trying to get black folks on predominantly white stages around the country. And there's nothing wrong with that. The diversity initiatives that exist within this country are important, and they're doing great work. Gateways was not founded to be a diversity initiative. Our mission is not to increase diversity within the classical music field. I like to say that we're just black people playing music that we love, and we're coming together to do it in a space and a place that is uplifting, affirming, and safe. That's it. Now, whether or not that contributes to diversity within the field of classical music, great. It doesn't, great. But we are black people playing great music at a high level, and we want to be with each other and to support each other.
And something that I don't think should be understated is that it's not just a convening of black classical musicians from across the country, but from around the whole world.
Absolutely. And that has grown significantly since the Artistic Programs Committee took kind of the leadership role when our founder retired back in 2009. And in those days, we were having trouble filling all the seats in Gateways in 2009. Now this year, we had to unfortunately turn away 250 people.
Right.
But we had musicians from London, Berlin, and Dusseldorf, and Bogota, and Santo Domingo, and Sao Paulo, all over the world. Folks are noticing what's happening in Gateways and noticing how special it is, and they want to be a part of it.
Now, you mentioned, having to turn so many people away, unfortunately. It seems like there's just a thirst for black classical musicians to really connect and meet each other and fellowship. And that has to be one of the biggest challenges of Gateways is, being limited in as far as how many musicians you can serve and have at this festival. Yeah,
it's a sore topic.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It causes me a lot of pain because I know how important Gateways is for those musicians and how much they need Gateways. And so we're working as hard as we can to grow the capacity of the festival so that we can invite more musicians. Related to the musicians, something that's happening that we wanted to happen for a while is that people are coming to Rochester for the festival from out of town, audience members.
Oh, wow.
And we wanted Gateways to become a destination festival. And so we think that, all around the country, there are black folks who love classical music, but they don't see themselves represented on the stages of the orchestras within their hometowns.
Right.
Or their kids are playing classical music, but they don't have any teachers that look like their kids.
Right.
So I was on a phone conference with our concert office yesterday, and we're working out details about lots of stuff. And the concert office says, well, we've been getting calls from all around the country. People wanting to know the details of the festival, where to stay, where they park, and I thought, wow, that's amazing, because we're getting them too. I didn't know the concert office was getting them too. So I think that in addition to Gateways, the musicians having this kind of international pull, I think that now there is an audience pool from around the country that we've not experienced before, and it's really great.
So along my journey, I've been a part of different diversity initiatives and that sort of thing. And while involved with one, I had to deal a lot with how can I say, like, the legality of having something focused, specifically toward black people. I was even on stage at one point, and someone told me, well, the program that you're involved in technically is illegal, but I guess they just let it run anyway. Do you run into any legal challenges when it comes to creating something that focuses on members of the black diaspora exclusively?
Yeah, it's interesting because we say, and this is true, we say that Gateways is open to everyone.
Yeah.
It is not an exclusionary organization. We're open to everyone. But we say that our focus is on musicians who have a specific shared life experience. And so we do not discriminate. Gateways is open to everyone. Anyone can apply to Gateways. But our focus is definitely on the shared life experiences of people of African descent, which is a very particular and unique experience in the world in which we live.
How do you think that shared life experience manifests on stage or in rehearsals?
You know, we're working on all these PSAs and ads and everything for, publicizing the festival in a couple of weeks. And I was reviewing one of them yesterday from one of the big TV radio stations here in Rochester. And they one of the clips they use is of when Stuart Goodyear finished the Rachmaninoff piano concerto with the orchestra, and Michael Morgan's standing up and congratulating him, and they're holding their hands high in the air. And if you look back and you see the orchestra, people are smiling, people are engaged, and I can't begin to tell you how many orchestras we've all seen where the audience is applauding wildly and the orchestra is kind of just blank faces.
Yeah, ones I played with.
Exactly, just blank faces, and so not even acknowledging the applause. Well, that's the conductor's job. But there's a sense of joy just when the musicians walk into the room on the stage of Kodak Hall for the rehearsals. There's a sense of family, sense of joy, and like you said, Michael, people want to be there, and so I think that comes through in the music making. I can't recall in the now 10 years that I've been in this position any conflicts amongst musicians, any conflicts with Michael, and I should knock on wood, right?
Yeah.
But it's just not something that happens at Gateways. There is this sense that we are all here about to do something really important and that means so much to us, and we have great joy about it.
Now, that specific performance that you brought up, Stuart Goodyear playing Rachmaninoff, that performance has come up on my podcast before. Me, Katie, and Delaney talked about it for a little while. And as I'm sure you remember, that concert didn't go completely smoothly. There was a little interruption in the audience, and unfortunately that interruption came from what looked like a school group, like a predominantly black school that came in to hear the Gateways Orchestra. And what I talked to Katie and Delaney about was how those kids were at a disservice for maybe not being prepped appropriately or not understanding what they were about to see. I mean, what was your reaction to that situation?
Yeah, that was quite amazing, and I think that the way Stuart and Michael and the orchestra recovered was astounding to me. It was a group from a summer program in Rochester that our former board chair and some others had worked on getting those kids there. There might have been about 100 of them. And they got there early because they had the organization provided lunch for the concert. Mm-hmm. So they got there early and they sat in front. And I think for kids for whom the music is kind of unusual or not known, I think we could have found a better seating area for them. But I was not upset by what happened at all. Those predominantly black children, I think they were 99% black, or children of African descent. Those are our kids.
Yeah.
That is our community, and we have a responsibility for helping to raise them up. And so I agree with you 100%. We could certainly have done more preparation for them, sent an ensemble out to talk to the students about what they were going to see, do all kinds of things, but a lot of that has to do with our limited capacity as an organization. As you know, at that time we were a staff of one, me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so how do we do all the things that we know we should be doing? So I think that the orchestra recovered beautifully in the day of modern technology. The recordings, you would never ever know that anything happened in that spot. So we move forward. But those are our kids, and we are responsible for them, and we love them.
You're making me think about the relationship between orchestra and audience. I mean, when you go to see a Gateways performance and you look on stage and you see all of these black musicians, the audience still just doesn't quite look like that. I mean, what can you say on that topic as far as that disconnect?
Yeah, I think that for many folks in the black community, classical music still is a foreign language. And I think that's, as I mentioned before, growing up in Chicago in the 60s and 70s, early 70s, every third grader in Chicago, I started in kindergarten, every third grader at that time was required to play a musical instrument. There were no ifs, ands, or buts. This was the entire school system in the city of Chicago. And it was the same in other cities like Washington, D.C., and I think Detroit. Many cities had requirements like that for kids to learn how to play a musical instrument. And so the language of instrumental music, the language of what we call classical music, was more familiar to us. And I think that that is something that we've lost within our community. So on Sunday mornings during the Gateways Music Festival, we go to play in 25 to 30 black churches around, not black churches, I should say that, in houses of worship around the city. And many of them happen to be black Protestant churches, houses of worship. And what we find is that many people think, well, we've heard Gateways already. They came to our morning service. We don't have to go to the concert. So I think that in some ways that program does our audience building effort a disservice. In that folks feel like they've already heard Gateways in the morning at their worship service, so they don't have to go. But I do think that the bigger picture issue is that even though there are black musicians up on the stage, the music is still considered a foreign language to many people in the African American community in these days.
And what that also makes me think about is how foreign the spaces are for a lot of black folk.
Yes.
Just going into that concert hall for the first time, or getting them into that concert hall for the first time.
Yeah. It's so funny you say that because I grew up in Chicago and I live in New York City now, and folks in Rochester, they will say, well, oh wow, that's 15 minutes away, and it's in downtown Chicago or downtown Rochester, and we're gonna have to find parking, and we don't know where to park, and it's so we've had to schedule meetings in the community because folks don't want to come down to Eastman and to Eastman School of Music because it's an unfamiliar place to them. And I find that fascinating. But you're right. You're absolutely right. It's not a place that many folks in the African American community are frequent. Morehouse Glee Club gave a extraordinary concert in Rochester back in the spring on their tour, and they did it at Asbury First United Methodist Church. It's a predominantly white church. But folks of African descent were more comfortable going there because they've been there before. And they have free open parking, this huge parking lot. And so the place was packed. It was standing room only.
Wow.
And the planners decided to go to Asbury over Eastman because they knew that the community did not have that sense of comfort at Eastman as they did at Asbury First United Methodist Church. So that discomfort is real, and it does affect, participation by people of African descent.
Well, so, I mean, for me, it just sounds like we need to take classical music off the stage. I mean, maybe not all the way off the stage, but, we need to do a better job of making sure that the music, we are going to our people and not the other way around.
Agreed. And as you know, we do the 25, 30 performances in the houses of worship, We also do 25 or 30 performances in community centers and rec centers and homes and stuff like that. But it's only chamber music. I think that the power of Gateways is really seeing 100+ black musicians playing together on the stage. That's the power.
Yeah.
And so I think that if we could take that full orchestra into the black community, why not do something in a park and perform outside in a show like many orchestras do?
Yeah.
New York Philharmonic goes to Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx every year. So I think that we do need to find a way to get Gateways, the orchestra, the full orchestra in the community, as opposed to always assuming that the community will come to Eastman Theater.
So what are some of the things that keeps that sort of thing from happening? Or, what we haven't mentioned yet is that the Gateways Festival, as of now, happens every other summer and not every summer. What is it going to take for these more engaging community events and maybe even an annual Gateways Festival?
It's all about fundraising and capacity. I think that Gateways has done extraordinary things with very, very limited resources. At a conference earlier this year, we talked about that and how much Gateways has been able to accomplish. And at that conference, I said, well, it's not unusual in the black community to be able to pull off something like Gateways because we are used to making a way out of no way. It is what black people have done since the time immemorial, making a way out of no way. That said, after 26 years of making a way out of no way and running with complete volunteer support and on a shoestring, we have so vastly outgrown that model. So in order to be able to become an annual festival, in order to be able to take the orchestra, the full orchestra of the community, in order to be able to invite more musicians, we have to have significantly more financial resources. And that means building the infrastructure of the organization as well. So it's about financial resources and building the infrastructure so that there's more than, now there are 2 staff people. But that's really insufficient for the scale and scope of the festival the Gateways is and the festival that it wants to become.
So what can people do to sort of help build this future of the Gateways Festival? How can they donate or donate their time?
Yeah. It's really easy. To make a donation, anyone can go to our website, and it's gatewaysmusicfestival.org /donate, and you can donate online. And there are opportunities for members of our festival planning committee, which is still critical to the work of Gateways. And we also have certainly opportunities for board membership as well. And our board is growing to become a national board, so we're recruiting folks from around the country.
So before I let you go, I want to ask you just one more question. So, a big part of the work I do is curating musical experiences for people, not just selecting music, but guiding them through the experience so they have a more engaging experience with classical music. For the black person listening right now who has never really engaged classical music, what would be your advice to them as far as an entryway or how to really begin an appreciation for classical music and specifically the black people who have helped make it possible historically and today?
Yeah. Well, now that could have been the entire conversation.
Yeah.
I think that, there are, in my mind, there are very few problems with the music itself.
Okay.
I think that it's a lot of the accoutrement, it's the stuff that we put around the music, the off-putting physical location experience, the absolute silence in the hall. You have to wear this certain kind of dress. There are all these people who don't look like me. That's not the music. The music itself, there are no problems with the music. It's the stuff that we put around the music in this country and maybe around the world that I think is off-putting to people. So I think that assuming that there's nothing wrong with the music, I think that the place to start is with the music and listen to the music. And all of this is so accessible now electronically if one has the interest.
Mm-hmm.
But I would recommend starting with, unlike what you and I started with in our training, starting with composers of African descent, and especially those that utilize our folk idioms. That music is so accessible. When I hear Florence Price, when I hear Carlos Simon's Amen that we're going to be playing at the festival this year, I think I'm back at home on the south side of Chicago.
Yeah.
I recognize those sounds. I recognize those tunes. I recognize that language. So I think starting there for a new classical music listener, future lover of African descent is a great place to start. And then when you start there, you realize, wait a minute, Dvorak is doing the same thing from his culture.
Right.
Rachmaninoff is doing the same thing from his culture. Right? And so I think that the place to start is the place that speaks most closely to the language you already speak.
Yeah, I love that word culture, and I guess to come back around full circle, we began talking about Nina Simone, and when I hear her covers of Beatles tunes or Rodgers and Hammerstein, the language is one that I understand. It comes from the culture that I come from, and in turn, that leads me down to a deeper appreciation of some of the people that she exposed Black audiences to and Black music listeners to. Yeah, that culture word is important. So I'm going to have to spend some more time thinking about that one for sure. Well, Lee, thank you so much for talking with me. I really appreciate this.
It is really my pleasure.
Lee Koonce in conversation with Garrett McQueen here on TRILLOQUY. And Garrett, I have to say, I was struck by a couple things in your conversation. Number one, he makes a great point about how classical music is looked at as a foreign language.
Yeah.
That it's something that's so outside the periphery of a lot of people of color growing up that they don't even pay any attention.
Right. Even if some of the sounds and some of the aesthetics are there, the language and the whole conversation surrounding it is, again, just foreign to many Black folk. But as Lee was saying toward the end of our conversation, there is classical music out there that does speak to our languages. He mentioned he didn't mention William Levi Dawson, but I thought of that composer when he was talking about music by Black composers that speaks to our experiences, to our folk traditions and all that sort of thing.
That.
Yeah, so William Levi Dawson wrote this, he wrote the Negro Folk Symphony. So it's this symphony filled with sounds that any Black person that knows what a spiritual is or who has ever gone to church would recognize. And I think I really need to reiterate Lee's point in that if you're trying to get into classical music, even if you're not Black, try to find the classical music that sort of speaks to your cultural experience. So if you live in Appalachia, go listen to Mark O'Connor. If you live in, I don't know what would tie to Omaha, Nebraska, but I'm sure there's some sort of instrumental music that ties to the culture of where you are, where you live. So so my personal challenge to you listening is to try to do that. Find classical music that speaks to your cultural experience or to your cultural geography or whatever.
Can you imagine where we would be if kids were learning to play an instrument just as part of the curriculum like he was talking about?
Yeah, most kids learn to play a recorder at some point, but that's just about it, I guess.
Or maybe some wood block or, a xylophone-esque sort of.
Yeah, metallophones and all that sort of thing, glockenspiels, like that.
But another line that he said, we are used to making a way out of no way.
And that made me raise my hands in the air. Ooh, goodness gracious.
I'm saying.
I mean, that in itself, you could just sit and marinate with for so long. When I think about my path, the things I had to do to try to scrounge up some money to buy cane to make reeds or to get the gas money to go here or there, and so please look up the Gateways Music Festival and support this very important American institution.
I was glad to hear him say that inquiries about the festival are way up, that even like apart from him getting inquiries, like the venue office is getting inquiries about where to park and what's it going to cost and everything. Hopefully there's going to be enough tickets.
Which I thought that was another great point he was making, is that going to unfamiliar spaces and making the experience just a little more convenient, because I know there are places I don't go only because I don't want to have to worry about parking and that sort of thing, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of great conversations there. I really enjoyed speaking with Lee. So by the time you're hearing this, I am getting on my way to actually go to Rochester. I'm not going to be there for the whole festival, but I'm going to lead the opening panel discussion and get some interviews while I'm there. And for that reason, in part, Scott, you're actually taking the lead next week with the interview portion of TRILLOQUY. What can we look forward to?
Next time, it is going to be with a friend of mine who is also a composer and working musician. His name is Devon Gray. You might have seen him on MTV with the band High Respects, a local hip-hop band, but he's classically trained, and I think that you're really going to enjoy hearing his thoughts and also what it's like to be a composer in residence with a major metropolitan orchestra.
Well, I hope y'all keep it trill. Scott Blankenship and Devon Gray next time on TRILLOQUY. And before we let you go, I'd like to announce that our website is live. You can catch up on past opuses of TRILLOQUY and keep up with the new ones by visiting trilloquy.org. That's TRILLOQUY.org.